Hey, welcome, and thank you so very much for joining me on another episode of Talking Cloud. Now, this is where we talk about, really, we should change the name to Talking About Anything in the World of Computing. It'll very likely involve cloud, because that's really why I called it Talking Cloud, because we talk about anything, but just about every aspect of computing today seems to be connected or somehow connects to or talks to the cloud. And I've said so many times, and you all know it, I'm the Gilligan man. I'm no professor. I am not the smartest guy in the room. But I really, being an old guy and around for a long time, I just have some really great contacts and connections. Many like the one today I call friends. I've known Vic for over 20 years.
Yeah.
I won't go through the long, I met him when he was at a company called Lucid Security back in 2001, 2, 3, something along those lines. He then, and you, I'm sure, all famously know the guy from NSS Labs. He was the leader of that organization for well over a decade. And I thought, I'm definitely eager to kind of get caught up. Now, cyberratings.org is what he's leading. He's the CEO and founder. And, I think a brilliant service. I'm really super excited to get to talk to my good friend, colleague, and someone who I respect highly, Vikram Phatak. Vikram, it's great to see you, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Grant. And by the way, we go back farther than Lucid. I had an ISP back in the 90s, and I used MetaInfo DNS.
Oh, my.
Yeah, we didn't actually meet until 2000, I think 2001, 2002.
Yeah, right. But you were a customer.
I was a customer of yours, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That goes back. A lot of people don't even know what we're talking about, but we both do. So listen, yeah. I'm so excited to talk to you about what you're doing now and, kind of how you got there. But as I mentioned, anybody who wants to see this guy's storied career, look him up on LinkedIn. I don't want to waste any time, but tell me, we could push it from the dock however you'd like. You already mentioned MetaInfo and how far we go back, but what do you want to talk about, man?
Well, I think probably cloud AI. We've been doing.
It's on fire.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of security stuff. Definitely, everything is sort of getting scrambled up, and all kinds of new great stuff is happening. And it's a fun time to be alive.
Boy, it's so true. I have to tell. So I'm a weirdo. Because I'm out with my dogs in the front yard. It's beautiful, and a lady's walking by, and we just started chatting. She's probably 10 years older than me, I think she said. But, you're talking about AI, and it was just kind of very interesting to talk to the normal person that really isn't in the industry and, how she looks at it. But specifically, we were talking about the rate of profound changes. And let me explain what I'm talking about. And the first one that kind of really came to mind, and I know there's ones earlier, but it was this move from newspapers to the internet.
Yeah.
Right. In big move. Right. And how, there's for the immigrants like me, I was hard to give up that daily newspaper, right? It was probably 10 years, not even 10 years ago that I finally gave it up. But the point was the time that transition kind of overtook
Yeah.
the previous. It was a period of time. It wasn't, 2 months or 6 months or even 2 years. I mean, it was like several, maybe even 5+ years before. And I think there were some laggards, right? Still are. But the point is now, when you look at how fast everything is consuming, using, enabling AI,
Yeah.
the rate at which we went from, we didn't really even talk about it, and it was there maybe in some machine learning, to now it's like meat, potatoes, AI.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get faster. You know, it's a really interesting phenomenon because like you have to have a reason for people to use stuff, right? So like with email, that was one of the big drivers back when the internet, right? I mean, that in the news groups because people wanted their porn like that.
Yeah, that's right.
I had my ISP and like
And one of the two, it's funny, there's two applications you mentioned, they're probably still in the top
yeah,
three. Right, I mean, reality, certainly email still the communications
right.
vehicle, right?
And it had to be something that was so profoundly so profoundly more convenient than what than the alternative that people then take the time and effort to figure out and learn a new technology, right? Because there's work
Yep.
involved. I mean, those of us are old enough to remember an email wasn't when we were born or came up in
Yep.
school and already had it. Like it was clunky in the beginning, right? And
Yeah.
those dial-up modems and all that stuff. I mean, people had some real effort. Like I don't know if people would do it today. Like working backwards, like people's heads would explode of the stuff we had to do to make it all work, right?
What we put up with to get to where we are, we would no way accept today. No
Right,
way. No
right,
way.
right. And I think we're in a similar curve when it comes to AI. We're in the dial-up modem phase of AI, right? Like all the prompt
Interesting. Hmm.
engineering and all the stuff we've got to do to have a little bit of magic, right? And
Hmm.
in just a few years, the rate of acceleration is really astounding, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
that in just a few years, what we're going to be looking at is going to be we're going to be in the cable modem, DSL phase in say I think
Right.
3 years, and then in 10 years we're going to be in the real
We
broad.
might be talking. It might be even a more compressed timeline, Vic. But I agree with you 100%. You know what I mean? It's so.
It's not the capability of the AI; it's the adoption of people. Plus, I think that there's no people are everyone is underestimating the impact of robotics with AI. I think the business uses in the personal usage, like that's where things really take off,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I don't think we're that far away from that. I mean,
I don't either. I think, what I find interesting about, I mean, you were just talking about the reason everything, if I understand all this stuff like the Gilligan that I am, because I just tried to, follow up on it, but it's my understanding, it's this transformer was such a game changing technology to aggregate, if you will, the efforts. So the outcomes are seemingly exponentially exponential, right? I mean, the pace at which we're able to come up with them. I mean, all you have to do is go take a look at Hey Jen, if you've never seen that website,
yep,
right?
yep.
I mean, and I show that, and it's like, this is today you can discern. 6 months, a year, you're not going to be able to tell. My lips are, you're not going to be able to discern, right? The old, is it live or is it Memorex? And so that, I don't know, it's it's the speed because of the aggregation, and this is something I just am a big believer. People need to understand the underlying technology to kind of understand what's going on in the marketplace, right?
Well, and Google just dropped a couple months ago an update to the Transformers thing. I think it's called Titans or something like that. That
Mm.
really, uh, I'm surprised we haven't heard more people talking about it, because it incorporates memory in a way that is profoundly beneficial to what we've been seeing in the way these models work. And I guess Google just also announced that they're not going to be sharing as much with everybody else, because everybody's been. Transformers. I don't know if you know. Most people don't know Transformers was Google's technology. They wrote a paper, and
Completely.
right, and put it out there, and
Yep.
then OpenAI jumped on it, and then the rest is history, right?
Exactly. And so it begs the question, what would have happened if they would have kept their mouth shut?
Yeah, well, yeah,
Right?
exactly. I mean, I think it's really going to be fascinating when people look back in 100 years and they say, look at what Google's been doing, and they're like the Bell Labs of today, right?
Hmm.
All the technologies, the internet, and all that stuff. I mean, was created in Bell Labs in the 1940s and 50s, right?
Yep.
It took decades for that stuff to come to the rest of us.
And I think that's the part that's accelerating along with everything else that I find really, you know, we were again talking about my conversation with Marie, and I was just thinking about, we went through this seemingly eons, but in hindsight now it wasn't that long. The dial-up phase,
Yep.
and once you dialed up, you had to then type in the URL and wait
Yeah.
and wait, and then you had to click, and then you waited, and so you finally said, and you'd grab the newspaper, right? I mean, that was in the very early days of, oh, hey, come
Oh,
on,
and
forget
then
the newspaper,
somebody
right?
would pick up the darn phone from another line, and would knock you offline, and you'd want to, like, your head would want to explode, right?
Yeah, totally. It's funny. Zohar, of course, Zohar Alon Dome 9, right? I just ran across this when I was looking up in old files, an NDA that I signed with him in 2011, 2012 for Dome 9. But I was remembering when he and I were on a Zoom back then, and he sent me a spreadsheet, and I still think about this today because we were talking for several minutes, but I was so amazed that before that Zoom call ended, maybe it was a Skype call, um, I heard my mail chime, and I got that 1 megabyte spreadsheet, and I was just like, you know my head was going to explode, because it was for the first time that it was unbelievable that, because this used to be, like you said, you'd be on dial up and you'd yell to the family, stay off the phone, I'm on it. And then, God, somebody would call you because you have a call waiting, and then it would screw it up, right? Call interrupting.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
But
I grew up. Uh, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, absolutely, and
I know we could go back and talk about when I
yeah,
grew up. The early days,
yeah,
I remember we had a party line between the house next door, but that goes back to people
yeah.
thinking, wagon,
But
covered wagon days.
I realized when you mentioned the Gilligan thing, that I've actually used that phrase of, that certain products are meant to stop Gilligan, not the professor.
Yes,
I heard it from
yes.
you, God, decades ago, and I totally,
Safety HCP.
yeah, yep, and
Exactly.
I've got an employee. Okay, she's like, I don't know how she's 22, 23, and I'll mention these cultural references, and she has no idea. She's never seen it. It's like, oh my God, how old am I now?
Yeah, it's true. It's
Yeah,
true. It's true. But it's funny. I that one always seemed to resonate, but I don't want to go there. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about um, cyber ratings and how things are going. I mean, honestly, I was thinking about this, Vic, before we started to record. I was thinking, absolutely one of the most critical things that this industry has to have is what you're doing. I'm telling you, man, because there's so much bullshit. There's so much hype. There's so many lies. There's so many manipulations of the words in the marketing. And it's just horrible. Not for those, I'm not chiding the marketeers, but geez, man, real people need to know they can go, to a Consumer Reports and have some level of integrity on the testing that's been done on the products that are listed. I mean, I just believe in that very passionately. So, before we even get into it, I got to tell you, I love what you have done for years, and I just think it's really, really critical.
Well, thank you. And it's taken a couple of years to get cyber ratings to the point where, but it's really interesting. Things are really accelerating. Part of it is like from a business perspective. Um, if I'm sure you were crossing the chasm back in the day, right?
Hmm.
And that chasm exists not just for individual companies, but for entire industries. And what
Completely.
NSS Labs before and now with cyber ratings does is, we're the troll at the bridge that basically can take an entire industry or certain companies across that chasm so they can scale, right? Because otherwise,
And vice versa.
and vice versa, right? Because otherwise, people don't know what's real and what's not, and that's our function, and our whole mission. I mean, at a personal level, I want to see the little guys who have the great technology come in and you know and win because they're the ones who've earned it. Right?
Innovation is
Long
the, I
hours.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, like
totally.
they've done the blood, sweat, and tears. And then when the big companies are in a market and they're not putting in the effort on the technology side, right? There's a lever with us, for people to see that hey, maybe you're not better off buying you know big brand name, right? You're
Right.
better off with a smaller one. Um, which sometimes you're better off with a bigger one. It really depends on the company. I don't want to just
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
but
Hey,
it's the test. The data is the data, right? That's very data driven. Um, but I should say very. It is data driven. It's like we've got our security value map, and it's kind of funny. We've been saying there's no they get the Gartner as their magic quadrant and say, well, that's great, but we don't have any magic. It's math, right? And but the the number of companies right now. I mean, because I think I had a health issue in 2018, so I'd stepped out of NSS, and then obviously they closed a couple years later, and then I started getting phone calls, which is how I got back with cyber ratings. Was like, okay, it's time to get back in the game because things are going sideways. The vendors, without a countervailing force, there's a theory with accountants years ago called market for lemons. That's how we get lemon laws with cars, right? Used cars, because the seller of a used car knows the provenance of the car if it's been in an accident or if there's something wrong
sure.
with it, but the buyer doesn't, right?
Yep.
Same thing with cybersecurity. I mean, cybersecurity is a black box, right?
Yep.
And it's gotten so complicated. People, I hope they test things on their own, but there's only so much you can really do.
Yep.
And the vendors, if they're not ethical, know that, and they know how to manipulate things so that they may look good in a test if you don't really know how to test for the real stuff, right?
Yep.
And some of them do, and there's various reasons, and some of it's that if they it's a thing that if you're honest and your neighbor is not honest, or your competitor isn't honest, then they're going to win and you're going to lose. So you have this problem that everybody's got this race to the bottom, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and what,
Well, and the integrity goes out the door. I mean, this is, everyone, I believe, or most, and I have to be careful with the all encompassing everyone. It's never that. But I think most of us want to see a study, a survey, an assessment, a report, and they want to believe it's accurate and true. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
unless we're subscribing to Mad Magazine and we're reading it, then we expect satire.
Well, so most of the, and again, it's not universal, but most of the executives I've dealt with at different companies are, they're honest. They want their technologies to work. There tends to be a cultural function that causes some of this problem, right? Different pressures and whatnot. I just walking through it, like, so there's a number of companies that have hired me over the years, or not me, hired NSS and
Mm-hmm.
cyber ratings over the years to help them make sure that their people are telling them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, right? And
And are you talking about the people, as in like within the
yeah,
organization
yeah,
themselves?
the
My product
CEO,
team is telling me this.
yeah,
My
yeah.
product team is
So
telling me that.
years ago, and this, I'll mention names here because they're no longer at this. So formerly Mark McLaughlin, who was the CEO of Palo Alto Networks, who's an amazing guy, and Renee, who's the CMO. He's again a friend, like we text,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And we didn't start that way. We started out with some reports that were fairly unflattering to Palo Alto, and
I think I remember those days actually.
yeah, and Mark, reached out, and we sat down, we had dinner, and we talked, and he was not a villain, right? I wasn't a villain. Like he did not have knowledge of some of the failings in the products, and there was, because of the way
Mm.
internally products are made, you're building it to a spec. The engineers are building it to a spec. We take an adversarial approach, which is very unnatural for a company to do to itself, right? Even a
Right.
security company.
Right.
And
And when you say adversarial, you mean every step of the way you're looking at it not from a hey, how is it for me, but you're looking at it on
how am I
how
going to
is
break
it
it?
vulnerable,
Yeah, how am I
how
going
can
to
I
break it?
break it,
How am I going to
how
break it? Like,
yeah,
how am I going to break it? How am I going to get past it? How am I going to make it do something that it was not meant to do?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
How am I going to mess with these guys? Like
yeah,
that's our job, right? And there's a certain
yeah.
mindset with that. And
Seems like that's much more a part of product development today than it was
yeah,
10 or 15 years ago.
for sure, for sure. But even now, um, especially with CI/CD and things like that, it it's very easy to miss it as a step,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
that's a good point. That's a good point.
And
And the rate and pace of change in those cloud
right,
specifically, right? I mean, the development and the pace is just crazy. It's so far off of the old days
right.
that exacerbates the
Well, there's also, I mean, I can go through the list. You've got, so let me kind of get to the point.
yeah,
By the time you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, right? That would say $100 million company, right?
yeah, a
Um,
big company.
Big company. People don't realize this about, and it's not everybody, but in my experience, people who've gotten to that level are not sociopaths. They're not sharks in the way that they're portrayed in the media. They're
Right.
they're if they're any good, and you've got different degrees of good and bad, they're highly ethical because investors are trusting them with their money. And if
Right.
let's say an example, let's say you're venture backed, it's the Wisconsin Teacher Fund or the Vanguard whatever fund that has some retirement. That's basically what we're talking about with the stock market. That
Yeah.
that they put money in as a limited partner into some venture capital, and then
Right.
venture capital puts their money into you, right? And so, you know, if things like the tariffs are happening right now, the first thing that happens is phones get picked up even today, and they call the VC and say, what the hell's going on? And the VC needs to be able to call the CEO and know that the CEO has their shit under control.
Right.
And they need to be able to trust them. Right.
Yep.
And so the number one factor in being a CEO that's leading a company like that is not management skills of the employees. It's not, and these things, a great CEO has a full package, right?
Sure.
But it's trust.
Okay? Trust. Amen.
So we're talking about highly ethical people. I mean, an example, so again, Mark went to West Point, right? They don't put out dummies generally, right?
Yeah, not cheaters, not liars.
No, that is not. And so and long story short is that I've been around long enough that it's interesting that you get a caricature of when you down at the hacker level, because we do that still, right? But of big evil company and all that, but it tends to be a function of like just the way big systems work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you've got a product guy who has some specs. They, then hand it to the engineering team, and then that goes off to wherever to get developed. And then they come back and yep, it meets the specs, and now we're going to push this thing. Right.
Yep.
And having nowhere in that process is anybody doing something that is, that nobody wants to think of themselves as the evil guy, right?
Sure.
So it could be that we've got a problem. An example, let's say that you're missing an attack, right? How you go to your engineering team to solve it is a huge part of whether or not you're really solving it or whether you're cheating, right?
Right.
You go to it with a PCAP and say, this thing is getting passed. Well, if you have a low information engineer or developer that doesn't have the context, they're going to write a signature that matches the PCAP, probably very specifically because you don't want false positives, right, to solve that problem. And I know there's now AI models doing this and whatnot, and we're repeating the same problem, by the way, because the AI model needs context. Otherwise, it's going to end up cheating and you don't have good protection, right?
Right.
So it gets handed back, and then someone like me tests it. And if you don't know what you're doing, you end up testing with PCAP you sent them, and oh look, they fixed it. When the fact is they didn't fix it; they just wrote a pattern match for that PCAP.
Right. Exactly.
And so understanding that this is how these things happen, and then working, to make it so that it doesn't happen is a part of it, right? And working, so it's working with the.
It's not. It's one thing if it were linear and it was never going to be revisited, right? I mean, I'll never go back, so that's okay. I mean, we're talking about something that it's quite the opposite, right?
And so we've had over the years, situations where people say, okay, well, we fixed it, and we go, not fixed, what's going on? And they swear up and down, and then we look at it, it's like, guys, we know what you did, right? You wrote a very specific thing that matches this very specific thing, and okay, so in the real world, the attacker's not going to use the Metasploit, right? That's just, I mean, they're going to modify it, right? They're going to use evasions. They're going to do stuff so that you're not detecting it, and that's your job, right? I mean, table stakes is like, can you stop the Metasploit thing? Okay, but if that's what you think your job is, like, that's not where the bar is. So anyway, I'm going on a bit.
And I'm wondering, Vic, I'm just going back. So I'm just in my mind imagining this. In a way, it's that internal supply chain, if you will, and the whole SDLC process, and somewhere the water changes from salt to fresh. I mean, somewhere it goes from I'm majority technical and minority business, and somewhere it goes to I'm majority business and minority technical.
Yes.
And those are varying degrees, right? And a lot of CISOs boast they used to be developers, but it was 25 or 35 years ago. So, and the farther you get away, the more your business acumen may be solid, but your technical. And so, what that means is I rely on that team,
Yeah.
right? And that's where it starts to get a little wobbly, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think it's also that at that point, um, you've got people coming and going, especially in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of job hopping, right?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
you could have a team of 5 people, let's say, developing something, and 2 years later, one of those people has left, and the domain knowledge has left the building with those people.
Yep.
The guys coming
Yep.
in, they're just maintaining, and if they don't,
And some of these guys, I mean, you know this because you've worked in groups like this, right? A group of 5, but it's not as if each one carries 20% of the gravity, right?
Yeah.
There's some of those groups where one of them's the sun and the other 4 revolve around him or her. And when he or she leaves, it's far more impactful than, oh, one of our developers. How many you got? Well, we had 5. Now we only got 4. You know, if you stop there, you're not really getting the context of the impact, right?
Right, exactly. And so, anyhow, that's you're exactly right. And so, our the way I look at it is our job is to make sure that the incentives are there so that companies invest in the technology, that it makes rational business sense to invest in the technology before you invest in the marketing. Because if there's no testing going on, if someone like CyberRadiance or NSS is not doing this work, right?
Right.
Then
It's your own internal QA,
then
right? Because that's pretty
right,
much what it would be.
then the most rational thing to do is to spend the money on the go to market, right? I mean, and it's not again, nobody's being evil or bad or anything like that. And I think that people
Right.
want their products to work, but there's no real benefit to make your product incrementally better, like because nobody can see it, right?
Right. Well, it's all, and it's what you market,
Right. Well,
right? It's what you tell everybody you have.
I used to say it's changed a little bit now, but not still pretty true. You can see when a product slows you down. You can see when it throws a false positive and it causes you to run around and waste your time. But you don't see when it misses something, right?
Yeah, because it missed it.
Yeah, and so
that's a really good point.
There's from a incentive perspective, that means how deep do you go down the rabbit hole from a technology perspective, and you could have engineers that know they need to do something, but most of the time those guys are not really good at articulating why they need to do something to management, and management is dealing with product management's got this list of features customers have asked for. They've got a list of technical debt they've got to deal with. And you've got some engineer coming in saying, we got to solve this thing. And I put it on the list, right? And it's not, there's that technical gap. And so people realize, oh, geez, this is one that we need to put at the top of the list here, right? And so...
So I'm just wondering, sorry, I got a train going by. So I think this is probably a more common problem. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it is.
It is.
And so what's a way to how do you solve that? How do you get cheesecloth or filters or something in that process?
Yeah, so for us, the answer has been that we don't dive into the internals of a company, and how they're going to do it. We test whether or not they've done it. And just knowing that that's coming, it's like knowing there's going to be a test at the end of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
People study differently. Right? It just, it's the behavior changes because usually it's the sale. Usually somebody's got to get something bad happen, and then sales are impacted. And then you get to the executive level, and they then now have a mandate pushing down saying, fix this, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then it ends up becoming part of the culture to incorporate those checks within their process.
Mm-hmm.
And the really good companies I've seen put bonuses in, uh, like on how well they're performing on independent tests and things like that, right?
Interesting. Yeah, certainly that makes a lot of sense in larger companies earlier in the game,
Yeah,
right? When you're on the chalkboard,
yeah,
it should be in that equation. Here's a concept of the program we want to roll out in 2027.
yeah,
And hey, the bounty on it is, and it'll go down by for each problem they find or something. I mean, that's an innovative approach, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And but it's also why when we see a smaller company come in and they're able to do things that the bigger companies are not, and people wonder why. And I mean, the short version, and it's going to be, I think, getting back to AI, it's going to be even more pronounced now that you have, Cloud Sonnet 3.7 with, the thing, sort of the
I love
it is in
Claude.
programming, or Gemini 2.5, and this is going to be dated, and people are going to laugh at this in 2 years, going, "Oh my God, that thing was right." But anyway, I digress.
That's the rate of change again, right? It's
Yeah,
like us
yeah.
talking about dial up. I
But
mean, people are,
the thing about startups that we've seen over the years, I'm sure you've seen the same thing, is that the ambitious people who know their shit tend to go there, right? They're not afraid to go because they know what they're doing. They know, right?
yep,
And not just on the business side. Usually, it's technical people that want to solve a problem, and they're usually passionate about solving it. Like, they don't sleep.
yep,
And so you can have a very small team that has a massive amount of leverage because they don't have one son. Maybe they've got two or three sons, and they've got these multiple teams that are interacting and they're revolving, and then you have this interplay of A players that are really getting stuff done together, and
yep.
that small team can do more than a team of 500 people at a big company.
Yep.
And it's because of that dynamic, right?
A little bit of that innovator's dilemma issue, right? I mean, the passion that's driving you isn't, which has more money in it, right? It's the idea, the concept,
Yeah.
the problem you're solving,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you were talking before, and it reminded me of the three different programs. I was told three things you can develop if you're a software developer. You can develop vitamins, aspirin, or crack, and you always want to aspire, right, to crack,
Yep.
because I mean, a vitamin you can live with or without it, right? No big deal. Aspirin, no, it's okay. You're taking away pain, that's a good thing. But crack, right? One taste of it was one, oh God, I gotta use it again,
Yeah.
right? And I think, obviously it's not one you want to share with your kids, but I mean, I think it's always. I remember you remember maybe Steve DeYoung, the guy who did development at MetaInfo.
Okay.
He
Oh,
used to
yeah.
call,
Hey,
big guy, lurch almost like a real deep voice, um, sex and violence. He said, that's what we're in the business of making sex and violence. I said, what do you mean? The first time he explained this to me, he says, Grant, DNS, DHCP, we didn't write it. That's out there, open source. What we're putting is the sex and violence on top of it, right? It's just all UI.
yep.
And I know you do, but for those listeners that may not recall the acronym BIND, look up Cricket Lou's book. I mean, it's 680 pages. So despite many of us thinking DNS is just a directory of IP address to host name, it doesn't. It's a lot more complex than that.
Yep.
And putting a UI on something that is that gnarly and deep was, that's not easy. but it was always about the sex and violence. And it was, the swooshes and all the things that add to the UI, right?
Yep. Well, so I mean, the reason we bought it and used it was because I could have junior engineers that didn't need to understand like how to implement it. They just needed to know what they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of people, Vic, that I find as I'm talking that we forget it was a BSD world, man.
Oh
This was all Unix. There wasn't anything else. And so you have to just really get your arms around. And this is something I'm curious what you think. I've often pondered, right? Think if you were Microsoft executive and you were in the fight with IPX and token broken ring and all these other, right? And all this new thing comes
yeah.
about.
And Novell and all that. Yeah.
Right. But all of a sudden, when this internet TCP IP thing took off, there wasn't a stitch of Microsoft you had to have in the back office
Yeah.
to get there. And I bet it mortified them. And I often think that was why they dove in with Active Directory to kind of hijack DNS, because in the very early days when we made that
Well,
switch,
it's not just DNS; it was LDAP, right?
well, exactly.
Yeah.
LDAP, exactly. People were using different directories. You might have been using NDS. You might have been using something else, right?
Oh
And it
yeah.
was, and I believe Microsoft saw that they could create something that attached and essentially hijacked that directory infrastructure, and it put them squarely in the back office where they frankly weren't.
No, I mean we had Sun, right? That was the thing. We had Sun Microsystems.
Yeah.
We did have some Windows machines. I remember Windows NT. We started
Yep.
3.1 and then 4, but it
Yep.
was so slow compared to Sun. Like just even if the specs on the servers were the same, like
Yep.
the actual like mail systems and like it was just it was
Painful.
I don't even have the words. Like it was.
I know. Painful. That's why it's painful.
Yeah, and
Uh,
yeah, so it's Sun Microsystems, man. Like I got to tell you that I was talking to somebody recently that like all this new technology that's coming out of the AI stuff and whatnot, and before that virtualization, Sun was doing virtualization in 2000,
oh, I know.
right?
They were.
And people were making fun of them. Like, what do you need that for? And they had the Sun Works. I forget they were called. The little Sun workstations that like were basically just the anyway. But a lot of the stuff that Nvidia's got going, if you look at it, I mean, that's the it is directly tied to what Sun was working on years and years ago. I mean, I'm sure if you looked at, where did the Sun engineers land? Like some AOL, some Oracle, right? But a bunch of them, I'm sure, ended up in NVIDIA.
Yeah, I imagine.
So anyway, but
yeah, no, what I've often wondered about, and I want to definitely get back because I got a couple of questions I want to ask, but one of the things that I wondered about was, I don't even want to go there. It will go off on a tangent. I want to ask you about, are you friend or foe to the vendor when your rep walks through the door? And how do you go to market? How do you generate money? I know you sell your reports, but I mean, if you don't mind, I'd like a little insight maybe into, how you monetize, where, how, and, as a .org, does that mean you get a raise every year because you can't make any money? I mean, how's that work?
Yeah, lots of good questions. So first, I'll say that from a money perspective, these tests are funded internally, and I'll get to the internal in a minute. They're not funded by any vendors. Okay, so if you ever read one of our reports,
yeah,
no vendor has bought their way in, no vendor has bought their way out. Like that's just the rules. That's the way it works. And I'm looking
Yeah.
at the camera. I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, I love the integrity, man. I'm serious. That's what I started off telling you. I think there's
Yeah.
such a
So
critical place for you guys.
so we are very much dependent upon people either becoming members or companies becoming members or subscribers, or buying reports, right? And now we also know through history that if you're one of the top, let's say 20-25% in a group of 7 or 8 vendors or 10 vendors or whatever, you're going to want to promote an honest test where you're winning, especially if you're not the market leader. Okay, so
Right.
so you know, in that kind of scenario, we do sell marketing rights. We don't care who wins, meaning we don't. The chips.
Anybody who wants the rights can buy the rights,
Right,
whether I'm
exactly,
on number first place or last place, right?
exactly, and that's just the way it works, right? So
Sure.
that tends to fund a lot of what we're doing. Now, separately, usually the way the cycle starts is, somebody who does, we get this test and somebody does poorly, and then executives go, I cannot have that happen again. You're not going to have a job if I have another report like that, so go fix it. And then they'll give us a call and we'll say, well, we can do consulting work for you. We can help you, but it's a consulting, it's the wrong way of putting it. We can run tests, and it's like the Princeton review.
Provide guidance. Is that
Right,
maybe more accurate?
Now, it's not going to be the exact same test as you get in the public. It's like the SATs, right? We'll
Right.
give you last year's test. We can give you, all the, we're working on different things, but you're not going to get exactly what we're doing because, again, that would, nobody would ever trust.
Disadvantage.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Nobody would ever trust anything we ever did again. If that's.
I mean, look, if you give somebody a 0 day and then try to tell me that it's testing against a 0 day, but it's day one for him, I mean, it's not a 0 day,
exactly,
right? I get it. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but we will run folks through the gauntlet so they can know earlier in the development cycle when they need to fix something, so that by the time they get to any kind of a public test, right, or get to any kind of an assessment, whether it's by us,
Yep.
or by Booz Allen, or by whomever, right, that they'll be in good standing, right? And so that is something that at the back end we do make money from that. Now, so those are the two ways that we're doing it. Now we are going to be coming out with some technologies that enterprises can buy. So, for example, for SSE, Security Service Edge, it's the problem we just talked about, except it's multiplied. Because if security is a black box, the cloud is also another black box. And
Yep.
put security in the cloud, and it's a black box and a black box, and it's
Totally.
all CI/CD, and things are constantly changing. And
Yep.
if you're an executive, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to be handing over the day-to-day responsibility of security operations, not the
Right.
policy, not the to Palo Alto Networks or to Versa Networks or to Checkpoint or to
Whomever. Another vendor. Yeah.
whoever. The model it has changed so that it's now incumbent upon you to do some sort of assurance, some sort of check to make sure that supply chain vendor, that's really kind of what we're talking about, is
Yep.
is living up to the promise and to the standard that they
Totally.
right. And
Hey,
so
look, you and I go back long enough, but this I think it's the same, it's just different. There was a period of time where, companies would get a T1, which is a 1.5 megabit connection. But we know upstream,
were they really getting it?
they were very likely getting a fractional and not getting a full T1. Or, I mean, there were instances, I shouldn't, throw shade on all service providers, but that kind of stuff was happening. Why? I didn't have any means at this end to know. That's what they said. So it seemed like it was slow, but it wasn't like I had fast or speed test or all these other convenient tests back then. And so you just believed them. And, it's the same,
Well,
same, just different, right?
interesting. There was a company, I can't remember the name right now, but back when it was at Lucid, um, the VP of sales came from a company, Visual Networks, that's what it was called. And what Visual Networks did was when you had frame relay, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
that you bought a 64K cider, which those who don't know what that is. That's your fixed block, and then a 256K burst.
Yep.
How do you know you're actually getting what you're paying for, right?
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
what Visual Networks did. They worked with enterprises who then had to go tell the service providers, put this thing on your
Yeah.
end of it, and they had to be
Yeah.
acquired by Cisco. I don't know what it was, 99, 2000, 2001, whatever it was,
Hmm.
just because that's what they did, so that you'd have this network visibility. Because you have
Right.
to know, if you want to measure, you have to have something on both ends, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's
It's sort of like right now you go out to your hose on the outside of your house. What's the PSI? I I don't know what it is. I mean, it's enough because I push my thumb on it and it sprays it out far enough. It gets, but I don't know. I just trust that it's enough. But there's sometimes when it's coming out pretty weak.
right. Well, right,
It-
and so that's the service that we're going to be rolling out over the summer. I think our big launch is going to be around Black Hat, where we're making it available to enterprises, and it
I
really
love it.
expensive. But the idea being that, um,
Keep them honest.
well, right, exactly. So it's just everybody. If you're doing this, you're going to need to have assurance. And if here's the thing, if so, this is the are we friend or foe when we walk in the door? So
Yeah,
it really depends. If you are the market leader, and we're walking in the door,
we love you.
well, no, probably not, because you've got everything to lose by having an honest check, and you're already in the
Oh,
public
I see. I see. I
and
see. I
very
see.
little
I
to
see.
gain,
Yeah.
right?
Not. I was thinking when you said market leader, I was thinking top performer, but
No,
those aren't the same, are they?
no, they're not. They're not, right? So this is, the magic quadrant for Gartner is what's your vision, and then how good are you executing it? Executing isn't technology. Executing is sales and marketing, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
are your sales numbers doing this? If they're doing this, then you can end up in the top right quadrant, right? And
Right.
there's a there, this is not that there's
And that's actually just the problem. I mean, that's the problem. If I'm a 400 employee company and because I don't have the means really, I don't have the resources. And how do I know? I go off of the marketing. And so I get seduced and sucked into believing what's the best
well,
is not really the best.
it's because it's what everybody else is doing, right? And
The
so,
lemming effect. Yeah.
and exact, and so and by the way, the Gartner stuff originally was created for investors, right? So that it was, again, some supply chain visibility, and so that
Right.
if you're an investor, you have an idea. Who are the guys that I should put my money behind? Which it's not a bad thing. Isn't it? Okay. Thankfully, I've been lucky in life, and I've got a couple dollars I can throw in the market, and having
Sure.
kind of a visibility to know, all right, these are the guys I should invest in. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's answering a very different question from what a buyer needs to know, which is, does this stuff actually work, right?
Right.
And so, again, if you have done the engineering work and you are a market leader, then we're your friend, because we're reinforcing this cycle and we're going to help you accelerate your sales. If you've put your money in sales and marketing and your engineering, you don't know where it is,
Yeah.
you probably
Yeah.
don't, you're not super thrilled that we just walked in the door, right?
That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah,
and,
that's
and
interesting.
and the guys that are
Hmm.
usually, say the in second or third position, the challengers, who they believe they've got a better technology, they tend to be the ones that are happier that we walked in the door, because now they've got a way to prove it,
Hmm.
right?
How do you get all this stuff, and how do you have apples to apples to apples? Because that
Cloud
stuff's
makes it easier.
expensive, man.
Oh, it is. It is. Like I say, cloud makes it easier. Like, we just did this cloud firewall test, which wasn't cheap, and we bought everything on Amazon, right? Meaning we bought, because not just the AWS instances are paid by the hour or whatever, but
Right.
um, we also had to pay for the licenses from the different product vendors, and right. So
Yeah.
again, it was not a cheap test, but because it's cloud, it's fractional, meaning I didn't have to buy like a
Right.
full year license to
Sure.
a Checkpoint, Cisco.
You didn't have to send a PO and receive a box
Right,
that is
right.
ABC firewall, ABC IDS, whatever, right? I mean,
Yes.
isn't it remarkable how much different that process is? But still, nonetheless, if you've got to procure it, so, I guess what you do is a pay as you go kind of license so that you use it, test it, and then
Yeah,
get rid of it.
exactly right. Because that lets us keep the cost of a test. So let's see, from a infrastructure perspective,
Yeah.
the cloud firewall test I think was around 45,000 between AWS and the vendors for us to
Right.
run the test,
Get.
which is
Mhm.
not bad. I mean, because if I could,
And that's just the product.
right,
That's
that's
not
not
talking about the time and the.
right.
I mean, because that's got to be a lot more, Vic, when you talk about configuring each
Well,
one and the tests
exactly.
and everything. I mean,
Well, there's the
that's
automation.
a.
There's the test. There's the research to make sure we have the exploits. So we're paying to get exploits. We're there's they may be out there on exploit DB in different places, right? But they're the hygiene isn't there, and we need to know that when we run an exploit, that it's going to pop a shell or it's going to do something. So,
Right. Right.
we have people that um, will have the target server. They'll have the client we're running. Let's say if it's a cloud firewall as an example, right?
Yeah.
And we're making sure that we can pop that shell on an Apache server or on an Nginx or
I
on.
mean, what you're saying is you're making sure you're shooting real bullets, not
Yeah,
rubber bullets, right?
exactly,
That it's.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, that's That's expensive. Then we have the tools, and thankfully we have a partner with Keysight. They sell more of their equipment when we use their equipment to test, because then the vendors go, shit, I better know what my product is
Hmm.
doing from a performance standpoint, throughput,
Hmm.
and they'll buy the Keysight stuff, and we'll work with Keysight to also work through bugs and work, because I mean it's one of the things about being a lab like ours is we're at the bleeding edge, right?
Yeah.
We get stuff before other people see it, and
Sure.
um, sometimes it's fantastic and works as advertised. Sometimes it needs a little TLC, and we provide. We've got a good relationship with Keysight to kind of make sure this stuff works, and which is another way we're making some money now. We got some test packs that, like, for our tests, if you want to run one of our tests, you can go to Keysight and you can buy it from them, and like performance, right? And
Right.
you'll know that it's gone through the bleeding part, and it'll work, right?
Has some integrity. Right.
Right.
I mean, I think that's really what,
Right.
in a word, I see um, cyber ratings represents, is integrity. And there's, in this industry now, with it has just expanded to so many categories, so many acronyms, so many vendors, so many claims.
Yeah.
I think what you guys are doing is absolutely critical. I want to know, tell the audience, the listeners, how can they learn more about you, help, sign up, be a member, do a
So,
little commercial if you don't mind.
yeah, come to our website. If you like, if you support this mission, then you can become a member. If either buy a report, that's an easy way, or become a free member. If you want to become a paid member, there's a button, and then someone will reach out and we'll talk, and figure out some kind of membership thing for whatever amount. But everything helps. As Grant was alluding to, there's a lot of expenses at the back end of this, and it's getting this stood up has been fallen to myself, and then the other executives that we kind of are fronting a fair amount of the expenses, and then at the back end we get reimbursed from it. But it's not what my expectation is that as we move into testing enterprise, helping folks with the assurance part, then I mean, frankly, from a business person perspective, that's where we're going to make some more money, because
Yeah.
this kind of a lab, we're not getting rich. Like it's not
Yeah.
it.
But honestly, from my perspective, and I feel very strongly about this in any business, we're not in business to not make money. And so I have no issue with any business making money, making a profit. I have an issue if you're raping me, right? But a healthy profit, man, I want it. What I expect in return is a healthy product,
Yeah,
a healthy service, a quality service, right? Quality experience. And if that's out of balance, that's where it's a problem. But look, man, if you're making a lot of money, but I'm just feeling like a pig in poop, happier than all get out, it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
hopefully that'll be a situation when we roll out some of the stuff for the
Well,
enterprises, and that the uh, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like we've been doubling, more than doubling year over year. Things are good.
but you're human resource intensive, right? I mean, I'm sure maybe you can get some AI to help you, but it seems like you can't get out of having somebody be the
Yeah,
administrator
yeah. Look,
testing,
AI is just not
right?
there yet. I mean, we're working on it. We're working on adversarial AI. We're working on GAN. We're working on because that's frankly where it's all going. Because the defenses are going to be AI driven.
Yep.
Offenses need to be AI driven, and But by the way,
Fight
that gets
fire with fire.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, it also gets back to some of the stuff I was mentioning earlier that um, the lack of context can cause junior developers to like cut corners and inadvertently and make products weaker,
Yep.
not stronger. Um,
Yep.
I think we're going to see that with AI in spades. In fact, I know
Mm,
we will because we already have. Like with the early
sure.
machine learning stuff, I mean, there was cases where one of the tricks we'd use to bypass security would be that we would sign. Basically, we would sign something, but it would be a self-signed cert. And what the AI had learned is that
Right.
if the application is signed, it's good, right?
Yep.
And so it was like, oh, you want to get past AV? You want to get past? Just sign it.
Yep.
Well,
Yep. Exactly.
there's the AV vendors caught onto that and they stopped. They started putting in
Yep.
checks to make sure and all that. But then here comes
Well, that's
EDR,
like,
and EDR
I
is the
mean,
same mistake.
I heard the AI. There was a test. I thought it was our own Navy or something that was testing it. This was, I don't know, a year or whatever ago, where essentially the move it was going to make was like war games. It was just going to kill the instructor. That was the way to get to
Oh
what,
yeah, 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 yeah,
it was like,
Drone, what was the drone one? I thought that was awesome.
yeah, yeah. It's like, she's man, you gotta, don't put that in production yet.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And if you see some of the videos, I know we're like so. By the way, that's one of the things with cyber rate. So historically, we've done firewall. We're doing SASE or SD-WAN and the SSE ZTNA, cloud firewalls. Like we're moving a lot of cloud, a lot of right. But where we're moving is AI, quantum. So the quantum cryptography post quantum is
Yeah.
absolutely in our sights because
Excellent.
we need it now.
Those were the two things I was going to ask you about. I mean, I imagine, obviously incorporating AI, but I mean, where are you in terms of like testing and
Yeah, so
looking
the AI
at, and
gateways I think is the big one, and I think it's going to be a bigger because there's so many questions about it, right? So you've got folks out there that um, then there's so many different aspects to an AI gateway, right? There's the I want to protect my AI. You have caching going on, right?
yeah,
Like that people wonder like how does like OpenAI or Anthropic or what's this cat or DeepSeek? What's this caching thing? Well, some of the stuff is repetitive, and just like anything else, you can load balance and cache, right? Like
right.
right, and so we've got that aspect. Then there's the policy content aspect of it to make sure it's not spewing PII, social security numbers,
Yep.
medical, whatever it is. And then, you on the enterprise side, you're going to have all kinds of proprietary information you're putting in your own. So all these different things come into play that when you
Yep.
start talking about an AI gateway that is going to be deployed not just by Anthropic or OpenAI or Google, but by enterprises because as they're rolling out whether it's Llama or whatever it is that they're
Yeah.
rolling out, right?
I'm chuckling. I'm chuckling because I remember in like early 2000s where you could get your own knowledge base
Hmm.
and you could buy your own Google, and essentially you had your Google appliance, but it was your knowledge base internal,
Yep.
right? Smacks very similarly to
Yes.
me.
Yes.
Uh,
So,
and
right. And so there's going to be, I mean, so we're developing tests, and so that's where a lot of the money goes in. It's actually what's interesting is there's two aspects of it. So the research part to make sure we have a good methodology, and methodology is what happens sort of is a combination of you write it down, but then you've got to develop the technologies to test this stuff. Like with stuff we're talking
right,
about now, like I can't just walk into Best Buy and buy this stuff. Or walk into like Ingram Micro or CDW.
right,
I mean, we're now there's thankfully there's some open source things that we can leverage, but we're having to develop technologies in order to test this stuff, right?
right.
That's where it can get expensive real fast, right?
Yeah,
And then, but so the AI gateways is a big piece of what we're moving into that we see, and it's that gets back to the crossing the chasm, the troll under the bridge. That technology for it to actually be implemented at scale, and I don't mean
yeah,
the big banks. They've got smart people; they can test it, right?
yeah.
Um, the there's just even those guys though. I mean, I think for them, the risk reward of not having someone like us come in and just have a look,
Oh yeah.
right?
Listen, I believe we're at a very, very interesting precipice because of the rate and pace of change, the 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 speed of the industry, and the complexity because of the hyper connected universe we're in. And every day there's new digital things getting on that. It's it's the aggregate of all of that. It has outscaled the capabilities of most organizations. Only the biggest, I believe, can really even have a chance. Or maybe it's that one or two company that has that one guy like Vic that's brilliant, right? But for the most part, complexity, rate of change
Yeah,
outstrip most people's
yeah,
capability to keep up.
absolutely.
And we got to go to specialists. We got to go to experts like you, like service providers. That's why I think it's so critical for you to do what you're doing, because as we move back into this phase of getting a fractional T1, I
Yes.
mean, because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about kind of moving back into this trust model where that all these things are getting delivered to me. I got to know it's really what you're telling me it is.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we keep on talking, but there was. You remember the timeshare stuff back in the days with the like way back? Like that's
Sure.
basically, I mean, that's how cloud computing is, right? And
Yeah.
now you're talking cloud and AI, and oh my God, I'm sharing. People don't think about it that they're actually sharing a physical server with their competitors and with all these other people. And how do you know that your stuff is really not leaking? How do you know,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
you click a button that says "Don't share with anybody else."
Right.
Like, is it a placebo?
Yeah, exactly. It's no different than, remember, Apple got chided pretty badly over their battery,
Yep,
right? Because their battery was saying, "Oh yeah, you've got 80%." You'd look back down and it was down to 2%, because it was all software,
yep,
right? And that's the thing I think also people often forget is software rules the world, baby.
absolutely, absolutely.
It,
So yeah,
Vic, I mean, we could talk for hours. I could tell I just looked at the clock and realized, Jesus, we've been going for over an hour, man. And I don't want to,
well, we can just do this
uh,
again. We can do it.
man, we have to, because I love what you're doing. I definitely want to help. And I mean this genuinely any way that I can, because I believe what you're about, the service you're providing, and you're just a hell of a stand-up guy I've known for more than 2 decades, and I love you, man. And I want to see you hit the cover off the
I
ball.
appreciate that. You remember me when I had hair.
And ditto, brother. I was thinking you and I looking, the difference is I couldn't grow a beard like that even in my dreams.
But yeah, this is I got this from my dad. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you look terrific. And I can't thank you enough for spending so much time with me. This was a great conversation. I'm definitely going to get you back. So you can, don't worry about that.
well,
Okay.
this has been fun. I enjoyed it. So
Great catching up. Please let me know if there's any way I can help you. If there's anything in particular, like links or something that you want me to include in the description, send them to me. And man, I'm super jazzed about your future. I look forward to keeping an eye on you guys.
hey,
So
thanks. I appreciate it, man. It's good
yeah,
to catch up.
thanks. Yeah, it was awesome. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, wow, Vikram Phatak, a good buddy and a brilliant executive in this industry with a long history, technical guy, great organization. Check them out, cyberratings.org. They do amazing stuff. I'd recommend you hire them if you got a product you want tested. And hey, like it, share it, subscribe, tell all your friends, and we'll look forward to having you back on the next episode of Talking Cloud. Thanks so very much.